Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we have the honor of speaking with Maria Paula Fernández, a true OG in the NFT space and someone I've had the privilege of interviewing on a previous podcast I hosted, but this will be your first time hearing from her on Rehash. The last time I interviewed Maria Paula was back in September 2021, just over 2 years ago, but might as well have been 2 decades ago in crypto time. If you were around back then and recall, that was peak bull market times. And not only that, but peak NFT hype and when NFTs were really permeating into the mainstream. Just to bring us back to that time real quick, September 2021 was months before the most expensive NFT sold for the equivalent of nearly 92 million US dollars in December of 2021. And when NFTs saw the biggest volume of sales in January of 2022, with over 17 billion US dollars sold in NFTs. Now, contrast that to today, when the total sales volume of NFTs last month in September 2023 sat at only 340 million USD, or about 2% of what we were seeing in January 2022. Maria and I start by catching up on what she's been up to since our last recording together and how she's been feeling amidst yet another crypto bear market, and notably one that feels different from previous bear markets that she's lived through. Even though overall sentiments are a bit low, I can always rely on Maria to bring some humor into the mix as we come to the shocking realization that Michael Lewis is in fact the new Tom Cruise. Keep listening and you'll hear what I mean. Something else I always look forward to and learn from my chats with Maria are new artists and projects I should be paying attention to, especially in the realm of generative art and conceptual art. She mentions a ton of artists in this episode, and I've done my best to link all of them or their relevant projects in the show notes below. 2 artists that got brought up a couple of times were Sarah Mayohas and Mitchell Chan, who we had on Rehash in Season 4, Episode 6, and I would highly encourage all of you to go back and listen to that episode for more context on both of their work. Also, if you want to learn more about Maria's background, how she got into crypto and art and all the work she's done in the space over the last 7 years, you can go back and listen to my previous interview with her from September 2021 on the Unstoppable podcast, and I'll link that in the show notes as well. Maria Paula was nominated by Dina Burke and voted onto the podcast by Dina Burke, Karsten, and an anonymous wallet. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Maria Paula Fernández. Maria Paula, welcome to Rehash. I wanted to say welcome back, but this is actually your first time on Rehash because the last time we podcasted together was on a previous podcast I hosted, the Unstoppable podcast. So welcome to Rehash.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to pick up right where we left off. We were just discussing, not on the air, about the fact that I was completely convinced that our last meeting was actually a year ago, and it's been 2. So it's really wild.
It has been 2 years, and just to put things more into perspective, 1 year ago was when the FTX crash happened, like we were just talking about before we started recording, which, that also feels like a totally different time as well to when we last podcasted together in September of 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much that has happened, and so many of the people that we thought were leaders or examples in the space have fallen quite spectacularly. A lot of us also experienced the test of faith through all of this process because it really, really sucked, and it was really demoralizing, and the news and the perception that people have alongside, all of the scams and crashes from the NFT ecosystem as well. The perception has been quite bad, and it's sort of like not great to say that you work in NFTs or in crypto anymore. But more than ever, now that we are going through the trial finally, and the depositions and cross-examinations and all of that, I'm following every day. So I have 2 things. I follow the Laura Shin report, then I follow the Molly White, the Web3 critic, she's great, report. And then I'm also reading at the same time the Michael Lewis Fantasia. It's an incredible experience.
How is that book? Because I've heard really bad reviews about it.
I called it Fantasia because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I can't believe he conned Michael Lewis as well, and he continues to have him under his spell. If I were a best-selling author like him that knows everything about everything, I wouldn't have published that. You know?
Right.
Not even for the sales. I mean, that's your reputation down the drain, especially like the trial has been incredible in proving how evil SBF is. And there's undeniable proof as well of how completely evil and insane he is. So just to everyone, I really recommend you, if you have the time to do the triple combo, then you wake up in the morning and you listen to Laura Shin. She does a daily recap, and sometimes she does a like longer form context podcast, which I also consume, of course. Then I go to Molly White's little Substack and I read her summary because it also includes a lot of critiques about Web3. It's like what I eat in a day, but what SBF craft I consume in a day.
Yeah.
The MP edition. And then I finish my day with some like 2 pages or something, because it's honestly quite gross to read such a stupid account and to hear about this wunderkind as well. So then I finish my day with Michael Lewis. It really leaves your head in a completely weird headspace, but you know, like we all love a little bit of a mindfuck. What's interesting is that the trial, and I'm really actually happy, is that after months and after a year actually of brutal scrutiny from the media, now everything that we're hearing in the trial, nothing of it has to do with the fact that they were dealing with digital assets or that they were dealing with blockchain technology. This is a low-grade scam, and it could have happened with monopoly banknotes or crypto. This would have happened anyways. You know, this is a people problem.
Yeah, and I like on the side, I kind of have this fascination for like true crime and cult stories and just how people fall into cults, right? And I've listened to so many podcasts and watched so many documentaries about all different kinds of cults. And what I've learned is anyone can fall victim to a cult. You know, you can be a really smart, intelligent person and still fall victim to a cult and to these lies and manipulation. And I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing with the Michael Lewis book, right? Like he's such a reputable person until all of this happened, and then he publishes this book about SBF, and you're just like, what happened to you? Like you were saying, like the book is a mindfuck, but it's like he got mindfucked by SBF to write that.
Yeah.
Right?
Is Michael Lewis what Tom Cruise is to science
yes,
to Scientology?
I think so. I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that at this point. I mean, wow, big unlock.
I'm gonna tweet that.
Yes, please do. I'll retweet it. But going back, I know we both listened to our last podcast interview within the last few days back in September 2021. And I do actually want to start off by asking you some of the same questions that I asked you last time, just because it was such a different time. Mm-hmm. Last time, I remember in our interview, you were talking about how fast the space was moving back in September 2021 and how exhausted you were. And you had expressed some disdain towards a lot of the what you called toxic positivity and hopium that we were seeing on crypto Twitter especially. And I'm wondering if your feelings about that have changed now that we're so deep in a bear market and maybe we're in need of some positivity and hopium.
My feelings have not changed at all. I'm very happy to report that. Actually, I was right. I think that currently we are in a pattern that people are still like, instead of building, like in the previous bear market, where we were all like, oh shit, ICOs were really bad, guys. We shouldn't have done that. Not everything can be put on the blockchain. Now it's time to validate the existence of the blockchain, so we might as well build until our fingers drop. This was the narrative. We wanted to prove that the technology was meaningful, that the technology had use cases, and we really succeeded at that. The narrative of this bear market, as I see it, is like, hey, do you have still some of that like extraction left? You know, can I get some extraction left or something like that? Because there's been so many people entering the space with these false toxic positivity and hopium and saying like you're gonna be rich, and they continued to invest, and when it went bad for them they continued to try to extract and see if there was another drop or another token that they could actually flip. And this continues to happen. They continue to try to cut their losses by extracting on different ways, and it's really hard to see. It's also very understandable because there was a lot of people joining crypto, and not necessarily all of them were educated on the principles of crypto. They certainly weren't there for the exciting technology. Some of them were, and they're still here and they're building really compelling products. But the majority of them, they're not. Normally in the growth of any technology, but now we have to deal with all these people that bought into a narrative, and the narrative turned out to be predictably toxic because it was a bubble.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first crypto bear market I've lived through since working in the space full time. But I could imagine that this bear market maybe feels a little bit different because it follows a period of this NFT boom that really brought people from the mainstream into the space. Like back when the ICOs exploded, that didn't really touch or speak to a lot of people in the mainstream. That really just impacted people that worked in finance or maybe worked in tech or something like that. But this bear market follows when NFTs exploded into like pop culture. Paris Hilton is talking about it. All these celebrities are dealing with it. NBA Top Shots getting sports fans involved with it. Like all parts of our culture have gotten involved in NFTs and now are feeling the impact of this bear market. So I can imagine how this bear market might feel a little different and maybe even worse and more tragic than previous ones.
Yeah, totally. And like in defense of ICOs, we were trying to find technological solutions to every problem on earth, sprinkled with some hypercapitalism. And that's not necessarily bad. It was just a lot for the time, and the technology was certainly not ready, and the ideas weren't really quite cooked, and there was no validation. But it was about finding solutions and finding exciting technologies. There's always some scams in between, but that's on every cycle of everything, right? In this case, some of the things that were built were very exciting technology, also finding technological solutions to problems or creating problems, but still, it was about solutions. But there was also the notion of these digital assets that were stripped from any kind of fundamental of anything. I was just discussing today these because I was thinking about NFT-fi, the combination between DeFi and NFTs, and how to leverage NFTs to obtain collateral, to take out loans and whatnot. And I personally don't think it can take off because a lot of the NFT collections, even some of the strongest ones, have zero fundamentals, or there were so many as well that it's very, very hard to recognize truly valuable assets beyond CryptoPunks, maybe beyond what Yuga Labs is building outside of the apes, beyond the Refix and the Beeples and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions that I asked you in our last interview about NFTs and just how you're viewing the space in general. So the first one is, what do successful NFT projects all have in common? And maybe a good place to start, and I've heard you talk about this in previous interviews or talks, is how do you define success in an NFT project? And I wonder if that definition of success that you have now is different from how you might have defined it back in peak bull market time, September 2021.
I don't think it would have changed so much. I think that one of the things that defines success for me now is, first of all, of course, the substance of the artwork. Maybe it's beautiful, maybe it's technically compelling, maybe it's conceptually compelling, maybe it has some fantastic roadmap. It's okay to have roadmaps as well. A lot of artists don't think they should have roadmaps. Some artists love roadmaps as a way to narrativize their work. Maybe the narrative itself is fascinating, and then there's also combinations of all of that, which all of that makes a project quite successful. I think success comes in many ways. I think that being recognized by both critics and supporters alike of NFTs is a big indication that something is successful. Another thing is obviously being able to create a very strong community, not of people just saying GM to each other, but of people sharing knowledge and resources. Another thing that I would say is it's also about the community. So, when I see the collector base of an NFT having all these prominent names that are not advertising that they bought the NFTs, but they're pledging for that particular collection and that particular artist or collective, then I think that the quality of the collector says a lot as well. Beyond that, I do like projects that use blockchain as a medium, that leverage NFTs as a different way to interact with communities, to discover networks of people, to create coordination games, and anything that can explore the technology in full beyond just an image. But, an NFT can just be beautiful as well, and that's totally fine.
So what are your favorite NFT projects? This is something I asked you back in September 2021 as well.
What did I say?
I actually can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm glad you don't remember either, because now we can listen to your answers now and go back and compare notes.
So what are some of my favorite NFT projects? Jan Robert Lecter's Web, launched recently in partnership with Fingerprints DAO, is a fantastic project and one hell of a way to procrastinate when you enter the interface of the project.
Is it a game or what is it?
No, it's a networked set of websites stripped of content. It's so fun. It's really, really well done. It's on-chain generated, and it's just really, really beautiful. Then I'm gonna say not an NFT project, but an artist. I like everything that Stevie P produces. I'm such a big fan of his sense of humor and the way that his projects are getting more and more technically compelling as well. And yeah, I'm just gonna probably repeat myself. I'm also choosing all men, but okay, you have to bear with me because I haven't been... Oh, wait! Sacra Familia by Anne Hirsch. It's the funniest shit I've seen. And for me, humor is a really important part of why I like art. I think that art that conveys a particular humor and that sends a humorous message to people is really the best art, at least for me. It just sparks reactions in me that no other beautiful fresco can do. For me, it's like if it makes me laugh, then it's good art. So Anne Hirsch, Sacra Familia. And Anne Hirsch, she just yesterday released the project with Gemma Projects by Lindsay Howard and Eileen, which is Letters to Scammers, which I think it's also really fabulous. So I love all of those. And finally, I've been playing quite a lot of Boys of Summer by Mitchell Chan. So I've been quite hooked.
I know Mitchell is one that we talked about in our last episode for sure. I'm now remembering a few others you mentioned. I think you mentioned Bitcoin by Sarah Mayohas.
Yeah.
And then I think a couple of projects that Sarah Friend was working on back at the time as well. And I haven't really kept up with her. I don't know if she's put out any new projects recently or not, but I do remember back then that she had some projects that were very
forms
that were very interesting and technically compelling and conceptually compelling as well.
As a matter of fact, I just closed our exhibition here in Berlin, Market Makers, that explore the topics of value and technology and what builds different markets. And all of those artists that you heard in the initial podcast have actually been featured. It's a show in a gallery, and I have been working and I have been showing these artists in the past 2 years several times as well. So, and everyone that I mentioned also, I try to show them when I curate IRL shows as well. So it all has a continuity. My tastes have not changed, and the Sarahs are also in my top artists.
Yes, love the Sarahs. I was going to ask you about Market Maker, so why don't we just get into that now? I was just going to ask how the event was, and then what were your biggest takeaways? I saw a bunch of photos and tweets and stuff about it, but I haven't gotten a chance to actually speak with somebody who was there or who organized the whole thing. So I'd love to hear about the event just from your perspective.
It was really one of the most positive experiences of the past years. actually, and it came in the funniest of ways. So Market Makers was an exhibition that combined NFTs and blockchain-based art with art from the permanent collection of a Berlin bank. And it was actually a marketing setup for the bank. They commissioned an exhibition from us. I got the weirdest email in March asking me to curate the show for a bank, and I'm like, what? Do you know who you're talking with? Is this spam? Is this a scam? I don't know. And then I got in a call with this very nice German man and a creative agency, and it turns out that they wanted me to curate an exhibition that combined NFTs with the works from their foundation. And this was because the bank is very crypto curious. Not only is crypto curious, but they have a wallet, and they wanted to test their wallet, and they wanted to educate about their wallet in the setting, in a bigger setting, in a setting that, added a little bit more substance. So they proposed me to curate an exhibition, and they would do an educational journey. The educational journey was in German, so I was like, I'm gonna stay out of this. My German is horrible. But I ended up putting together a working team of people that I have been working for a very long time. I always usually work with the same collaborators. So my initial NFT collaborator, Stina Gustafsson, who I've been working with since 2015 and working in NFTs since we started the Department of Centralization. She was there. Another guy from Berlin, Chris Deikotet, that helps me with the exhibitions that we do for JPEG and the community building initiatives that we do for JPEG here in Berlin, was there as well. And artist Simon Denny, he also helped us curate, and he was the curator of an amazing show in 2018 called Proof of Work in Berlin that a lot of people saw because they came for my hackathon, and then they got to experiment one of the first shows that showed blockchain technology as a medium. And I've always looked up to that show, so it's been great to revisit that. Also in a venue very close to the original venue of Proof of Work. So that was really cool. And basically, we started off with NFTs, but obviously while looking at the bank's collection, I noticed there were a lot of artworks that were connected to different topics about Eastern Germany and value exchange. And there was also obviously regular art. And since I do love art that uses finance as a medium and blockchain as a medium, as I mentioned, so I saw a lot of parallels, and we put together a pop-up event. It was a 3-day gallery bonanza. It took 7 months to prepare. A production team that worked for a whole week on making sure all the cables were perfect. And it was great. It was packed every day. We had a natural wine bar because, we needed to also cater to the bank's private clients. And we invited all of our friends. Many people from NFTs came, from traditional art world here in Berlin came, and it was just so fun.
Before starting Rehash, I was a solo creator for many years, and I often felt disconnected and lonely despite doing something I loved. With Rehash, I was seeking more connection and set out to create a community-generated podcast. Since then, I've made genuine connections with community members and fans by co-creating the show. That's why I'm so excited about Lore's launch on Base. Lore is an all-in-one platform for communities to bring their members and their funds on-chain. From there, communities hang out in a forum, crowdsource decisions, and make transactions together. Now, it's easier than ever to fund and co-create media initiatives like Rehash. Go to lore.xyz to kickstart your community initiative today. So cool. My first thought, and I'm wondering if this is your first thought too when a bank came to you to ask you to curate an art gallery, is did you just think about Sarah Mayoha's stock performance project right away? Because that was the first thing that came to my mind, like combining finance and art and blockchain technology. Like that's basically that was the first thing that came to mind.
Interesting. Well, because I had to put together some slides to present to the bank so that they would give me the commission. Mm-hmm. It was a tender process like anything in the corporate world. So I put together my proposal for market makers, like NFTs and artworks that have to deal with value, that explore the tensions between the traditional finance system and the cryptocurrency system. And then I made this slide and I put together Sarah's Bitcoin together with an imaginary banknote from an artistic collective that created an imaginary republic in Germany in response to all the economic mismanagement during the 70s and 80s. And I put them together. And the second one that I chose was CVPs, certificates of negative value certificates. It was crazy because you could see artworks being matched with each other in such a magical way.
Yeah, and I mean, that just reminded me too, I would even throw Mitchell Chance Digital Zones in there too, with kind of the certificate.
We showed it.
You did, yeah. Okay.
We showed it. We borrowed the Digital Zones physical copy with the blue paper and the certificate. And we borrowed from the bank like a desk that they use to sign up the clients to give you your first bank account. And they're like these huge neon orange desks with white letter. And we put Mitchell's book on top. So it looked like this was the manual that the bank was giving you. And people were like, is this art? Why is this furniture from the bank here? You know, they didn't understand. We had the employees there. Like, why is my workplace in a gallery? It was so fun.
So cool. I love that. And I want to get deeper into curation with you because when I think about Web3, like art curation especially, you're one of the first people I think about as I think one of the pioneers in the Web3 art curation space. And we've already this season had a few guests on where we've talked about Web3 music curation, we've talked about Web3 media curation, but we haven't talked specifically about Web3 art curation just yet. So I wanted to start by just getting your take about, you know, when we think about curation and the role of a curator in the Web3 art world, what are all of those components that we should be thinking about? Is it really just thinking about what a gallerist would do with choosing which art pieces to display? Or is it like, it sounds like from what you were just describing of market makers, there's this much more holistic experience than simply choosing the right pieces of art to display?
Yeah, for sure. So curation is not only selection. It's also not how to spatially set up stuff on a wall in a way that it is compelling to see. When you're working with different artworks, you also want to create some kind of narrative that groups them all together in a way or the other. And you want to create the blueprint for how to set up those artworks in a way that serves the narrative. So think if you had like connecting threads between the artworks to make sure that you're talking about like, okay, you know, you have this ceramic JPEG here and I want to place it next to an NFT because it's a JPEG, you know, but I don't want to explain that to people. I just want them to see the ceramic JPEG alongside an NFT and to think, oh, JPEGs, right? So that's a very basic example. But just to explain, there's a message in between the artworks that you want to share with people. You want to put artworks in, people call them in dialogue with each other. And you want to create connecting tissue, connecting narratives, and a particular framework. You need a framework to create a bigger exhibition. You know, you can curate one artwork next to the other, but when it comes to dealing with like 45 artworks, like we dealt with at Market Makers, it's a completely different story. You need a whole approach. And it's nicer if you have a thesis as well, because curators love to write, so they're going to write a thesis. So all of that is also curation. The assemblage of a narrative is curation, and the spatial setup is curation. It's also curation to build context around the artworks, to historicize the artworks, because that adds to the narrative, but it also adds to the package of the exhibition. That is what you in the end will get, because exhibitions are so ephemeral. They last only for a period of time, but you want to package things in a way that you have them properly documented, and you can pass those documents on to other people and they will get an idea of what you did. So all of that is curation. Curators also in Web3, and I take these from a spaces that I had yesterday with Eli from Proof, where he remarked that for him also curators are responsible in a way for educating people. This NFT is meaningful because X and Y. This NFT is actually interesting because it's completely done on chain. What is on chain? What do you want to look at when you're collecting on-chain artworks? What are the nuances of on-chain? Can also be communicated by a curator. Of course, it's a lot of work, so you need to also tap into other experts. But a curator sort of packages all of that knowledge alongside artworks and communicates to the people.
What does that look like in the digital world? Because for example, when I think about curating music, we think about playlists. If I consider myself maybe not a curator of music, but just a big fan of music, I have good taste in music, for example, maybe I have a bunch of different playlists on Spotify that showcase my music curation that I can share with people or people can discover. But what does that look like in the digital space with somebody who has either a background in art history or just has a deep interest and passion for the culture around art and has good taste in art and wants to curate that? How does that come to fruition in the digital space?
I mean, you're right that is curation in a way. Curation is also like an invented word. It comes from Latin curare, that is to look after. And actually the notion of a contemporary curator, I learned it yesterday also on the Spaces. It came in the 60s or 70s. So it's a new idea. Before they were just the commissioners, the people that took care of historicizing, that took care of writing essays about the artworks, of making sure that the provenance was right, and of displaying everything. There was no idea of a curator. In the context of such a vague thing, and now there's menus of wine, and there's curated salami, and there's curated everything. Anything that involves a little bit of selection is what we tend to call curation. In other realms, you can curate the playlist, like you said. But when it comes to artworks, we try to create new narratives. We try to create new connections between artworks that didn't necessarily existed. Like Sarah Mayoha's Bitcoin wasn't thinking about crypto certs by Ed Fornieles. But in my exhibition, I put them together because I think that they belong to the same category of art, where Sarah Mayoha's with Bitcoin initially, she created a coin to sell her prints, and Ed Fornieles created crypto certs through which he issued shares of his studio practice. So you can see the parallels here. I'm categorizing them not only in a particular category, but I'm also creating this connecting thread between them. And I want people to see them together and to understand, they're talking about the same thing. They're connected. So how does it look like in the Web3 space? I love browser-based exhibitions. I love them even better when they're not skeuomorphic, when they're just websites. I'm not really a good navigator of metaverses. They're also a little bit clunky, a lot of them. So it can be in many forms. Actually, you can create a PowerPoint like I created for market makers, and I put things next to each other. And I asked the viewers to understand that there were relationships there. So it's all about crystallizing those relationships. First of all, researching enough and making sure that those relationships are possible in a way, and then crystallizing them and making sure they're visible to people.
I wonder if in some ways our on-chain wallet is essentially a curated gallery of sorts. For example, knowing that you are somebody who appreciates blockchain art that has really interesting tech components to it, and that you appreciate generative art and conceptual art and things like this, if I'm also somebody that appreciates that kind of art, I might think, well, let me just see if I can go take a look at María Paula's wallet and see what she's collected, and in that way discover new artworks and discover new artists. I'm kind of thinking out loud if we can take this a step further, because I do think that discovery is really important and really needed and can help a lot of artists and help a lot of NFT projects get the discovery and the attention that they deserve.
I totally love wallet watching. I spend a lot of time doing that. I don't think that wallets are curated. We mean so much shit every day, and we also mean things as a favor, and we mean things as an experiment, and we mean things to support people, and we mean things that we truly really love, and we buy things that, you know, we always aspire to buying, and we put all of those things in the same address. So there's no way that that is curated unless you are like a complete freak and then you are just minting conceptual art from one wallet, which is never the case. My wallet actually looks like a garage sale. It's a disaster. You can get a glimpse of what I like, but you can also get a glimpse of what I do at 4 a.m. when I can't sleep. And there's many great interfaces that actually help you select stuff from your wallet and arrange it in a way that you can create these narratives or that it looks very nice to you, like Gallery, for example. So it's possible to do a curation with a wallet, as it is possible to do a curation straight up from OpenSea and not asking for permission. But I do look forward for better discovery mechanisms. I think looking at other people's wallets is one of the best ones we had and one of the most genuine we have. But yeah, this is something that I've always wanted to build and I don't have an answer to because it's very hard to index the NFT space.
Are there any projects you can think of that you think really could have benefited from good curation and maybe didn't end up getting the attention they deserve because that curation didn't exist?
I mean, it depends, because a lot of the projects that I love come from sources that work very hard in creating them, so you can consider them as curated. And so yeah, it's a tough one.
I know, it's a blurry line. It's hard to say,
yeah,
you know, what's really been curated and what hasn't.
Yeah.
And
what I can tell you is that a lot of the projects get good curation in one way or the other via, you know, the people that mint them. They get great context about the quality of the project, because if a person that has really good taste or is very competent technologically means that, then that signals me that that project is good enough, or it gives some sign of approval.
Yeah.
But there's never enough context around NFT projects, and there's never enough visible threads around NFT projects. There's so much art, really good art, that exists in isolation or that is taken out of context. It's crazy. And especially, we only talk about collections here, but especially with one-of-ones. Because, you know, a lot of the one-of-ones that were created very early, they didn't have the right metadata, so you can't really search for them. And, you know, a lot of the early NFT projects as well, they're very hard to look for. Combine that with mechanisms like OpenSea shared storefront contract, where all of the NFTs, from like a random PFP to a really good artwork by an artist that is technically competent but not technically savvy to launch their own contract, which is something really hard, and everything gets grouped together. So let me rephrase. Actually, the OpenSea shared storefront contract could really use some really good curation. That is a disaster of very big proportions, and it gets a lot of good art lost.
One curated exhibit that I recently discovered through JPEG is called Generative Art Beyond the Algorithm. It's curated by Brian
Dratcour.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you more about that, because I noticed that it really fit a lot of the criteria that you've talked about in this episode, with providing good context, providing education, providing good narrative and storytelling around these projects. I think Brian did a fantastic job with all of that. So could you talk a little bit more about that project and what was the thought process behind that, and just share as much as you can share about it?
Totally. So Generative Art Beyond the Algorithm is an exhibition that explores different processes that go beyond the creation of an algorithm for generative art purposes, like we see on art blocks. Usually it proposes the artist to not only think about the algorithm, but also to think about the concepts, to think about narratives, and to think about different ways to play with other processes that are not algorithms but are generative. For example, like a brush stroke is actually a generative gesture. And in generative art, beyond the algorithm, we looked to surface something, even art blocks projects that went beyond what the algorithm does, and these are the outputs. And then the ones that are at the narrative are actually the collectors, not really the artist or the rarity. It was curated by Brian. Brian is the editor-in-chief of Outland. Brian, for many, many years, was an editor at Art in America. And he was one of the leading critics from the post-internet art era. We started talking to Brian very early on at JPEG. Actually, when I first talked to Brian, I didn't have anything to show him. JPEG hadn't started. And then he was one of the first supporters of JPEG. And when we launched project, he became part of the community. And he wanted to curate the show. He had curated other shows, of course. He has incredible knowledge and he comes from the art world. So he was telling me at FWB Fest, hey, I actually want to curate a show. And I'm like, well, let's talk, And we were doing this drop by Jonathan Chomko, Natural Static. And the way that we launched our first drop in 2021, Salt, it was alongside an exhibition called Deep Time to help contextualize the work of Salt, Figure 31 and 0x Mons, the authors of Salt. So for this time, for Natural Static by Jonathan, we wanted to do the same, an exhibition and exit through the gift shop or drop. So we commissioned to Brian, we called in an expert. We really wanted to work with him. He really wanted to work with us. He wanted to curate the show, and we made his dream come true, and we produced the whole thing. Brian did a fantastic job with the selection. He also wrote, he's a writer, he's a fantastic one too. So he also wrote educational paragraphs why he selected every single piece. He wrote his thesis, and we shipped it alongside Natural Static. And on top of all of that, we also created this RL exhibition of Natural Static in Public Works Administration in New York that was also co-curated by Brian. So he had an RL URL experience of curation with us.
That is super cool. I'm curious to hear more about Natural Static as well by Jonathan Chomko. How did that project come about?
So Jonathan comes from Montreal, and the Figure 31, the artist from Salt, also comes from Montreal, and they're really good friends. So Jonathan has always been close to our community, and he's been launching several NFT collections that were very, very conceptual. And JPEG's community has a trend to be also into conceptual art NFTs. So he was always a friend of the house. And then he came with this project, Natural Static. Basically, over a year, he recorded water. He recorded the Hudson River. He recorded some streams near Montreal. He recorded lakes. And then he would sample these images with different digital processes. And he would extract the parameters, being color, frequency, sound, whatever, from a token hash to create like a full artwork that was both informed by nature and informed by the blockchain and supported by the blockchain. And they actually look really, really nice as well, I have to say. So we thought it was a really good project for us to support. Every once in a while, we support artists that are looking for launch partners to realize their visions. And we thought this was the natural evolution of our upcoming drops. The previous one had been one that helps you track your social graph. So you mint an NFT and then it expands your social graph based on your wallet activity, and you can see all of these links between people. That's called social contracts. So after social contracts, we were looking for like a new artist, and we thought that Jonathan came with a really nice proposal. He needed help with regards to smart contracts, and he needed help with regards to having a launch strategy, because this was a bigger collection than he's used to. He does low editions. And we loved everything about it. So we wanted to support as much as possible. We always try to give a little bit more to the artist than we can. So we set up a beautiful pop-up exhibition in the New York subway in Times Square that looked really amazing. And then we also brought Brian into the equation to curate the exhibition that would help launch Natural Static. And I have to say, the collectors of Natural Static, and you can go to Etherscan and see them for yourself, but everyone from Dmitry Cherniak to Snowfro and Mitchell Chan and just we have really incredible collectors. Same happened with social contracts. The quality of the collectors really made a huge difference. We're just very happy with the results. Didn't mint out before the deadline, but it was such a positive experience. And through the span of a week, we did everything. We went from IRL to URL, and it was also very positive to see, because the exhibition featured other artists than Jonathan. It was very positive to see all of the artists that were featured in Brian's exhibition support Jonathan as well and recognize Jonathan as one of them. So, yeah.
Super cool. Yeah, I recognize some of the names in the exhibition that Brian curated, like the Schlom's car exploding pieces thing. That one I was really familiar with. And then I think one with Sarah Zucker and another with John Gerard that I had heard about before too. But honestly, like overall, I have to say I was just super impressed by what a great job he did with narrative and the storytelling. For me personally, I like to know how the artist itself, the creator, interpreted it and what's their story behind creating the piece and things like that. So I'll definitely link that in the show notes so people can go check that out as well. I can't even describe it with enough justice to how great it really is, but you should just go check it out for yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of words there. We did a lot of writing. We love writing.
I know you have a background as a writer as well, so that totally checks out. I don't know how many of you know this about me, but my path to podcasting and Web3 was actually quite nonlinear. From being a lawyer to a travel blogger to a podcaster and so many other little things in between. Because of this convoluted journey, I've always struggled with how to tell my full story via traditional means like a resume or LinkedIn bio, and I always felt there was so much context missing from these mediums that probably left any potential client or employer reading it totally confused about who I am or what I can offer. So while I absolutely love certain aspects of being self-employed, like being my own boss and being able to set my own schedule, there are other aspects that have been a constant source of frustration, like the fact that existing apps and tooling don't seem to be built for self-employed people at all. That's why I'm so excited about Quest, a new platform that lets me record all of my contributions on-chain, decide which projects I want to showcase, and take control of my professional identity. To follow along with our Rehash quests and check out my profile, you can sign up at quest.com/DC so you never miss an episode and create your own Quest profile today. I think the last question I asked you on our 2021 interview was, where do you see NFTs being in the long term? Like in 10 years, I think is what I asked you. And I think your answer was, I can't even tell you where anything is going to be in 2 months, let alone 10 years. So I'm wondering, now I'm going to feed you the same question again. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so as always in crypto, because it's so unpredictable, there's no way to know where we will be in 2 months, of course. But I'm beginning to see things a lot more clearer now, especially with the latest acquisitions by institutions. And while acquisitions from institutions like MoMA, the Whitney and Pompidou, they're great, like finally, and they take a very long time to do. So I'm so happy that they're finally happening and that they're finally seeing the great art that we have on this corner. But also, I hope that in many years, we're building our own institutions. Blockchain art and NFTs are so rich and so different sometimes to traditionally digital art that they deserve their own institutions that are able to fully understand them. And also, it's time for a reset of institutions, just because we build our own alternative currency, we build our own alternative governance, we build our own alternative financial system. We can also build our own alternative art institutions that can live in total harmony with the current ones. So that's what I hope for the future, that we have not only fantastic art being adopted by trad institutions, but also that we have our own.
That's a beautiful picture that you painted for the future. And then lastly, we always end every episode with a question from the community. I'm going to give you 3 questions and let you choose one to answer. So The first one is from Meg Lister. It's, what's your favorite crypto drama? And tell us about it. The second one, also from Meg Lister, is, who would you invite on the podcast next season? And then the third one is submitted by Floppy Abe. Estimate your success rate in your attempts to crypto pill your off-chain friends and family members. Paint me a word picture of your average attempt.
So I don't crypto pill anyone because this pain, I don't wish it to anyone. So I can't answer that one. I'm going to choose the favorite crypto drama. Because I just told you about my method of consumption of the SBF thing. And it was really funny because a year ago when the SBF drama started, I was on my way to a digital art conference in Slovenia where I had to paint a positive picture of the crypto ecosystem and everything. And I was going through the worst test of faith in my whole crypto career. And my crypto career is now 7 years old. So it was huge, I worked on this most of my professional life. So I was just crying in the bathroom and I had the slides with the most doom ever and everything. So I have to say that the evolution of that drama to finally finding out that it was never about crypto and the different coverages, which are all really, really great. And all this network of things, it's akin to Enron. I'm also a really big fan of the Enron drama. I have the book and I read it every time I have time. So for me, it's very basic. It's just like the SBF saga.
I'm sorry to hear the timing of how all of that went down for you. Yeah, that's terrible.
For all of us. But I was like, do you know that meme? Like the meme that you paint your clown face? I was just like in a bathroom stall, sitting down, crying. And then I was thinking of that meme. Instead of like crying like a normal person, I was just thinking of that meme as myself because I cry in meme apparently. So, but yeah, and I was like, everyone was asking me, hey, how are you? I'm like, how am I? And no one cared, But it was my own little personal battle in the end. But in a bigger context.
Yeah. Wow. Well, hey, it builds character, right? That's how you're still here 7 years later is you all those little experiences you've been through. It builds character every time. And now you're just committed to crypto for life and you can't get out ever.
Yeah, committed to the beat.
Well, Maria, tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you personally, check out all of your funny, spicy tweets, and feel free to plug away at anything else you would like as well related to JPEG or anything else.
Yeah, find me on Twitter. My very cringe Twitter handle is MP the real MVP. It's old. And yeah, you can also find me running the JPEG Twitter on the JPEG Discord, which you can find on the JPEG Twitter. The JPEG Twitter, basically, it's like 6 underscores, JPG 6 underscores. So that's a little bit complicated. So better you find me on my Twitter and then I can take you anywhere.
Awesome. We'll link it all in the show notes as well to make it easy for people. Thank you so much, Maria, for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you,
It's
Diana.
always a pleasure talking to you. And we'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Diana Chen, and sponsored by Quest and Lore. Rehash is also supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. To learn more about how to become a guest on the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. And to learn more about sponsoring the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/sponsor. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Lens at rehash.lens. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.